The morning of Marcus Harlowe's funeral was the kind that made people want to believe in signs. The sky over Greenwich, Connecticut, had turned an unusual shade of pewter grey, not the soft grey of a simple overcast morning, but something heavier, almost purple at the edges, like a bruise spreading across the horizon. The trees along Millbrook Lane stood perfectly still. No wind, no birds. The silence was the kind that settles into your chest and refuses to leave, the kind that makes even the most practical people pause and wonder if the universe is trying to say something. Claire Mercer stood at the ironing board in the kitchen of the Harlowe estate, pressing the black dress she would wear to her employer's funeral in 3 hours. She moved the iron slowly, deliberately, watching the creases disappear from the fabric. Her hands were steady. She had made peace with grief years ago, or at least she told herself she had, and she knew how to perform composure even when her throat ached. She had worked for Marcus Harlowe for 4 years, 4 years of 6 a.m. starts and 12-hour days. 4 years of managing a household that ran like a small corporation, coordinating a staff of 9, tracking the needs of a man who owned 3 companies, 2 properties in Europe, and apparently, according to the lawyers who had arrived on Tuesday, a sailboat in the Azores that nobody, not even his personal assistant Donna, had known about. 4 years of watching a man build walls around himself so carefully that the walls had become invisible even to him. She had respected him. She had also feared him, in the way you fear someone whose silence carries more weight than most people's words. And somewhere in the complicated geography of that 4-year working relationship, she had come to care about him, though she would never have said so out loud, and certainly not to him. Now he was dead. A cardiac event, the doctors had said, sudden, at 51. A man who jogged 4 miles every morning and ate the kind of meals that required a nutritionist's approval had simply stopped on a Tuesday afternoon in his private office while reviewing documents for a merger that would now never happen. "Mama." Claire set the iron down. Lily was standing in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas, the ones with the small yellow ducks that she had chosen herself at Target 3 weeks ago and which she now considered non-negotiable sleepwear. She was 6 years old and had her mother's dark eyes and her father's. Well, that wasn't a door Claire was opening this morning. "You're supposed to be in bed, Bug." "I woke up." Lily padded across the tile floor and leaned against her mother's leg. She smelled like sleep and the lavender soap Claire bought in bulk. "Is today the sad day?" Claire stroked her daughter's hair. "Yes, baby, today is the sad day." "Is Mr. Marcus going to be in a box? People say it's just his body. That the part of him we knew." Claire paused. She was not prepared for theology at 6:40 in the morning. "Yes, he'll be in a box." Lily was quiet for a moment, the way she sometimes got quiet before saying something that would require an adult to sit down. "Mama, Mr. Marcus isn't dead." Claire looked down at her. "What?" "He isn't." Lily said it with the particular certainty of a child who has not yet learned the courtesy of uncertainty. "I know." Claire knelt down to her daughter's level. Lily's expression was completely serious, not the performance of seriousness that children sometimes put on to get attention, but something quieter and more genuine, the look of a child who has seen or heard or felt something she doesn't have words for yet. "Lily," Claire kept her voice gentle, "Mr. Marcus passed away on Tuesday. We talked about this. Remember, sometimes people's hearts—" "I heard him," Lily said. A cold thread moved through Claire's chest. "You heard him?" "Last night. I got up to get water." Lily pointed down the hallway that connected the staff quarters to the rest of the house. "And I heard somebody in his room walking around." Claire stood up slowly. The staff quarters were separated from the main house by a long internal corridor, accessible through a locked door for which only Claire, Donna, and the head of security held keys. Lily was not supposed to have any reason to go near it. "You went into the main corridor?" Claire asked carefully. "I was thirsty. The water in our kitchen tastes funny." It didn't taste funny. Claire had checked the filter last month, but Lily had a theory about tap water that she had developed independently and was prepared to defend at length. "And you heard sounds from Mr. Marcus's bedroom." "Walking," Lily said, "and something else like a drawer, like he was looking for something." Claire looked at the clock on the microwave. 6:47. The household was still quiet. The rest of the staff, Maria, who handled laundry, Henry, who managed the grounds, young Pavel, who had been hired last fall to assist with the kitchen, would not arrive for another hour. The house was theirs, essentially, until 8. She should have dismissed it. Lily was 6, and children processed grief in strange ways. She had read that. She had a paperback about childhood bereavement somewhere in the bottom drawer of her nightstand, purchased with the quiet foresight of a single mother who tried to prepare for everything. But she did not dismiss it. Because there was something in Lily's face, something steady and present and not at all like a dream being recounted, that kept Claire's feet from moving toward the reassurance she had been about to offer. "Did you open the door?" Claire asked. "The one into the corridor?" "No, I just listened." "And you're sure about what you heard?" Lily looked at her mother the way 6-year-olds look at adults who are being unnecessarily slow. "I'm sure." "Mama?" Claire unplugged the iron. She hung the black dress on the back of the pantry door and looked at it for a moment, the dress she had bought 6 months ago for a cousin's funeral, the dress that was now performing double duty in a way that felt deeply unfair. "Get your slippers," she said, "and don't make noise." The corridor between the staff quarters and the main house was wide enough for one person to walk comfortably and smelled of old wood and the specific silence of a house in mourning. Claire kept her hand on Lily's shoulder as they moved down it, past the framed photographs of the Harlow properties that Marcus had put up years ago and never taken down, even when his marriage had ended, and his ex-wife had, from what Donna had mentioned once and then immediately changed the subject, taken almost everything else. The door at the end of the corridor opened into the main house's back hallway, near the library and the east staircase. Claire paused with her ear against it for a moment. Nothing. She opened it. The main house on a morning with all the curtains drawn was a different country from the one she managed during working hours. The familiar rooms felt compressed, the ceilings somehow lower, the air stale in a way that central heating usually prevented. She moved past the library, past the formal dining room with its covered chairs. She had organized the draping herself 2 days ago, with the particular efficiency of grief that has work to do, and stopped at the base of the east staircase. The door to Marcus Harlow's private study was at the top of those stairs. The study was where he had been found, where he had been pronounced dead. The study was where a light was on. Claire saw it from the hallway, the thin yellow line at the bottom of the door, and stopped so suddenly that Lily walked into the back of her knees. In 4 years of working in this house, Claire Mercer had learned its rhythms the way a sailor learns the water. She knew which lights were on timers. She knew which ones could have been left on by accident. She knew which ones had been systematically shut off by the estate manager, Gregory Poole, when he had walked through the house on Wednesday morning and prepared it, efficiently and joylessly, for the period between a man's death and his burial. That light had not been on yesterday evening. She was certain of it. She had walked past this staircase at 9:15, when she had come to check that the thermostat in the main hall was properly set and the study had been dark. Lily pressed against her mother's side and said nothing. Claire stood at the bottom of those stairs for what felt like a very long time, looking up at the thin, bright line under the study door, and felt the careful architecture of the last 4 days beginning, in some way she couldn't yet name, to shift. Word count. 1. 504. I've fallen short of the 1-800-2000 target. Let me complete block 1 properly. She took 1 step up the staircase, then another. Lily followed without being told, which meant she had inherited Claire's particular brand of stubbornness, a fact that would probably make the teenage years very interesting. The stairs were carpeted and made no sound under their feet. The upper hallway was long and straight, with 4 doors on the left, 2 guest bedrooms, a bathroom and Marcus's personal library, and 2 on the right, a storage room and the study. The light was definitely on. Up close, it was unmistakable. And then Claire heard it. A drawer opening. The specific sound of a file drawer being pulled, the smooth rolling sound of good hardware, the slight resistance at the end. She knew that sound because she had organized those files herself. 2 years ago, when Marcus had fired his previous assistant and asked Claire to step in temporarily while they searched for a replacement. The replacement had never been hired. Claire had simply continued. She knew every drawer in that room, and someone was opening them. Her hand went to the door handle. She hesitated for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to consider every reasonable explanation, all 2 of them. A staff member who had come in early for reasons she couldn't imagine, or a burglar who had chosen the worst possible timing in the history of burglaries. She pushed neither thought very far before she turned the handle and opened the door. The man sitting behind the desk looked up. He was pale. He had dark circles under his eyes that went deeper than tiredness. He was wearing the same clothes he had been wearing on Tuesday when he had been found, the grey merino sweater, the dark trousers, and his hair was uncombed in a way that she had never once seen in 4 years. But his eyes were open and focused and looking directly at her with an expression that, after a long moment, she recognized as the one Marcus Harlow wore when he had been caught doing something he hadn't planned for anyone to see. Lily pushed past Claire's leg and walked into the room. "I told you," she said, with the absolute infuriating, magnificent calm of a 6-year-old who has just been proven right about something. Marcus Harlow looked at the child, then back at Claire, and then he said in a voice that sounded like it had been unused for several days, "I can explain." But the expression on his face, the look of a man who has just been found by the very last people he expected to find him, said something entirely different. It said, "I don't know where to begin." And Claire, still standing in the doorway with her hand on the frame and her black funeral dress hanging downstairs on the back of the pantry door, said nothing at all, because Marcus Harlow was sitting in his own study at 6:52 in the morning of the day of his own funeral, alive, and she had absolutely no idea what happened next. Claire did not move for what felt like a full minute. She was a practical woman. She had raised a child alone since Lily was 4 months old, had managed a household staff of 9 for a demanding and complicated employer, had navigated medical emergencies, flooded basements, a kitchen fire that Pavel had caused last November and which she had handled with a fire extinguisher, and remarkable calm before the smoke alarm even had time to process the situation. She did not panic easily. She did not fall apart in front of people, and she especially did not fall apart in front of employers. But nothing in 4 years of working for Marcus Harlow had prepared her for the specific experience of standing in his study doorway at 6:52 in the morning of his own funeral and finding him alive, pale, and apparently sorting through his own files. "Close the door," he said. His voice was rough, the way voices get when they haven't been used properly in days. But it had the same quality it always had, that particular low authority that did not need volume to land. Claire stepped fully into the room and closed the door behind her. Lily had already made herself comfortable on the small leather footstool near the window, which she had apparently decided was her chair, and was watching Marcus with the open, unself-conscious attention that only very young children and certain documentary filmmakers can get away with. "You're supposed to be dead," Claire said. It was not the most elegant thing she had ever said, but it was accurate. Marcus looked down at the desk briefly, then back at her. "I'm aware of what I'm supposed to be. There was a death certificate. Yes, I read it. I know. Donna told me you handled most of the arrangements." He paused. "Thank you, that must have been—" "Don't." Claire surprised herself with the sharpness of it. She took a breath. "Don't thank me for arranging your funeral while you were apparently alive and choosing not to tell anyone." A silence opened between them. Lily, on her footstool, looked from one adult to the other with the focused interest of someone watching a tennis match. Marcus Harlow was not a man who explained himself. In 4 years, Claire had watched him make decisions that affected dozens of people without offering justification to any of them. He operated on the assumption that his reasoning was his own business, and he had the kind of authority, earned, not inherited, which somehow made it worse. That meant people generally accepted this. His board accepted it. His lawyers accepted it. His ex-wife, from what little Claire had gathered, had stopped accepting it approximately 3 years before the divorce was finalized. So when he leaned back in his chair and said, "I didn't die," it was not the full explanation it might have appeared to be. Marcus. Claire almost never used his first name. She had used it perhaps twice in 4 years, both times in circumstances that required it. He registered the use of it now. She saw it in the slight shift of his posture. There is a funeral home on Westcott Avenue, preparing to transport a casket to St. Anthony's Church in, she checked her watch, less than 3 hours. There are 47 people who have confirmed attendance. Donna has been barely sleeping. Gregory had a full breakdown on Thursday that I am fairly certain he doesn't want me to tell you about. And my daughter, she glanced at Lily, asked me this morning if you were going to be in a box. Lily nodded at this, confirming the accuracy of the record. Marcus looked at Lily for a moment. Something moved across his face, not quite guilt, not quite softness, but something in between that Claire had never seen there before. "She's the reason you came up here," he said. It wasn't a question. "She said she heard someone in the corridor last night. She said she heard you." He looked at Lily again. "How did you know it was me?" Lily considered this with appropriate seriousness. "Your feet," she said. "You walk like you're always in a hurry, but you don't want anyone to know." Claire watched something happen to Marcus Harlowe's face that she had genuinely never witnessed in 4 years, the beginning of what might, in a less guarded man, have become a smile. He pressed it down immediately, but it had been there. "I need to know what happened," Claire said. "All of it." Marcus was quiet for a moment. He looked at the files on his desk, the ones he had apparently been sorting through in the early hours of the morning, in his own house, while the rest of the world prepared to mourn him. Then he looked at Claire, and she had the distinct impression that he was calculating something. Not whether to trust her exactly, but how much of the truth he could give her without giving her all of it. She waited. She was good at waiting. It was one of the skills the job had required, and she had developed it thoroughly. "3 weeks ago," he said finally, "I received information that someone within my company was preparing to move against me. Not professionally, personally." He chose the words with care. "There are details I won't go into, but the threat was credible enough that I took it seriously." "Move against you," Claire repeated. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means what it sounds like." She absorbed this. "Someone wanted to harm you. Someone had already taken steps toward it. The Tuesday event," he stopped. "What happened Tuesday was not a cardiac event. I was drugged. The compound they used mimics cardiac arrest symptoms closely enough to satisfy a physician who isn't specifically looking for it. I was found quickly enough that the effects were reversible. But I had approximately 18 hours in which my condition was," he paused, "ambiguous." Claire sat down. There was a chair near the door, a simple wooden one that had always been there, and she sat in it because her legs suggested she should. "Ambiguous," she said. "The doctors who treated me were people I trust, completely. We made a decision together, in that window, to allow the ambiguity to stand." He looked at her steadily. If the person who did this believed they had succeeded, they would stop. And if they stopped, they would make mistakes. They would reveal themselves. "So you faked your death." "I allowed a situation to continue longer than was strictly necessary to correct." "That is the same thing." He didn't argue with it. Claire looked at her hands in her lap. She was a woman who had built her life on a specific kind of reliability. She showed up. She managed. She kept things running for other people, because it was what she was good at and because it allowed her to give Lily a stable life in a world that had not always cooperated with that goal. She had managed this house for 4 years, with loyalty and discretion, and a level of investment that had always surprised even herself. Given that she was technically domestic staff, and Marcus Harlowe was technically not the kind of man you formed attachments to, and he had been alive, in his own house, for at least part of the time she had spent the last 4 days managing his death. "Who knows?" she asked. "Besides the doctors." 2 people. As of this morning, 3. She looked up. He was looking directly at her. "Why are you telling me?" she asked. "Because you found me." A beat. "And because you would have had to know eventually." "Why eventually?" He looked at the files on his desk again. "Because I need your help. And I think—" He stopped, and for a moment something crossed his face that was harder to read than anything else she'd seen from him this morning. I think you may be the only person in this situation I'm certain I can trust." The word certain landed differently than she expected. Marcus Harlow was not a man who used it carelessly. She had seen him hedge in boardrooms, qualify in contracts, resist absolutes in negotiations where other men committed freely. Certain was not a word he deployed lightly. "What do you need?" she asked. Before he could answer, Lily slid off her footstool and walked to the desk. She stood on the other side of it from Marcus, looked at him for a moment with her dark, serious eyes, and then reached across and put her small hand over his. "I'm glad you're not in a box," she said. The silence that followed was the quietest thing Claire had experienced in a very long time. Marcus looked down at Lily's hand on his. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He sat very still, the way people sit when something has touched a place they forgot existed, and Claire watched something shift in him. Slow, almost invisible, but real. When he finally looked up, the calculation she was used to seeing in his face was not entirely there. What was there instead, she didn't yet have a name for, but it was the beginning of something. She was certain of that. The funeral had to be stopped. That was the first and most immediate problem, and it was the kind of problem that had no elegant solution, only a series of increasingly uncomfortable phone calls and the particular social damage that comes from undying in a small, wealthy Connecticut town where everyone knew everyone and gossip moved faster than grief. Claire handled it the way she handled everything, methodically, without visible panic, and with a cover story that Marcus provided in clipped, precise sentences while she wrote it down on the back of a grocery list she found in her cardigan pocket. The official version, communicated first to Gregory Poole and then, through Gregory, to the funeral home and the priest at St. Anthony's, was that a critical error had been made in the identification and processing of medical documentation, a bureaucratic failure involving two patients with similar profiles at the hospital, a mix-up of records, a tragedy of administrative incompetence that the Harlow family's legal team would be addressing with the hospital board in due course. Marcus Harlow was alive. The service was cancelled. Deepest apologies to all who had been informed and had made arrangements to attend. It was not a believable story. Claire knew it wasn't. Gregory Poole, to his credit, asked 0 questions over the phone, and then presumably sat down somewhere very quietly and had the second breakdown of his week. The funeral director accepted the news with the professional composure of a man who had encountered stranger things. Though his tone suggested this was a lie he was willing to let himself believe for the sake of everyone involved. The priest said he would pray for clarity, which Claire thought was the most reasonable response of the three. Donna was the hard call. Donna Reyes had been Marcus's personal assistant for 11 years. She was 53, sharp as a letter opener, and had the kind of loyalty to Marcus that Claire had always found both admirable and faintly alarming. She had also spent the last 4 days in a state of controlled devastation that Claire had observed closely and found genuinely difficult to witness. Claire made the call from the kitchen while Marcus remained upstairs and Lily ate cereal at the kitchen table with the focused contentment of a child who has been told she is part of something important and is taking this responsibility seriously. Donna picked up on the first ring. "Claire." "Donna, I need you to sit down." "I'm already sitting." A pause. "What happened?" "Marcus is alive." The silence on the other end was long enough that Claire checked twice to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Then Donna said, in a voice that was entirely flat and entirely controlled, "Tell me everything." Claire told her what Marcus had authorized her to share: the drugging, the decision to allow the false report to stand, the plan to draw out whoever was responsible. She did not tell Donna about the files Marcus had been sorting through at 6 in the morning, or about the way he had looked at Lily's hand resting on his, or about the thing she couldn't name that had shifted in his face. Those details were not relevant. She told herself this firmly. Donna arrived at the house 40 minutes later. She walked past Claire in the front hall without speaking, went straight upstairs and closed the study door behind her. Whatever happened in the next 20 minutes, Claire was not there for it. But when Donna came back downstairs, her eyes were red and her posture was the straightest Claire had ever seen it, which meant she had made a decision to be furious later and useful now. "What do you need me to do?" Donna asked Claire, as if Claire were the one running this. Claire handed her a list. She had written it while Donna was upstairs. It was specific and detailed and covered the next 6 hours in 15-minute intervals, because this was how Claire's mind worked under pressure, and she had long since stopped apologizing for it. Donna looked at the list. You made a schedule. Someone had to. Donna folded the list and put it in her jacket pocket. He's lucky you found him. Lily found him, Claire said. I just followed her. The morning moved forward. The cancelled funeral created a ripple that neither story nor schedule could entirely contain. 47 people had been notified of Marcus Harlow's death, and unnotifying them required a personal call to each one, a task that Donna undertook with systematic efficiency, and from what Claire could hear from the hallway, a level of creative storytelling that suggested she had thought about this contingency before and prepared material. Meanwhile, Marcus came downstairs for the first time. He moved carefully, the way people move when they have been horizontal for too long, and their body is reminding them of this. He accepted the coffee Claire put in front of him without comment and sat at the kitchen table, not in the formal dining room, not in his study, but in the kitchen, at the table where Lily was still sitting with her cereal bowl and a picture book about deep-sea fish that she had been carrying around for 3 weeks. He looked at the book. What's that one? He asked, nodding at the page she had open. Lily looked up. Anglerfish. She turned the book so he could see. It has a light on its head to trick things. Marcus looked at the picture. Does it work? The book says yes. Lily considered this. I think it's sad, though. The thing that comes toward the light thinks it found something good. Claire, at the counter, did not look up from the coffee she was making, but she heard the pause that followed, the half-second in which Marcus Harlow sat in her kitchen across from her 6-year-old daughter and had nothing to say. That is sad, he said finally. It was a small thing, but Claire noticed it. The way she had been noticing small things all morning, storing them somewhere she hadn't yet decided what to do with. The larger problem announced itself at 11:14 when Marcus's phone, a secondary phone Claire hadn't known existed, which he produced from a locked drawer in the study, received a message that he read once, twice, and then carried downstairs to show Claire with an expression that she recognized immediately as the one he wore when a situation had become significantly more complicated than anticipated. The message was from a number with no name attached. It said, I know you're not dead, and I know who helped you. This ends differently than you planned. Claire read it twice. Who sent this? I don't know yet. Marcus's jaw was tight. But they've been watching the house. The cold that moved through Claire was different from the one she'd felt upstairs in the early morning. That had been surprise. This was something closer to fear, because there was a child at the kitchen table 12 feet away who was now on her 3rd reading of the anglerfish page and had no idea that the situation her mother had walked into had just changed shape entirely. Lily needs to leave, Claire said immediately. Her voice was steady. She had decided it would be steady before she opened her mouth. Claire? She is 6 years old, and she is not going to be in this house if someone is watching it and sending messages like that. She kept her voice low and looked at him directly. Non-negotiable. Marcus looked at her for a moment, and she saw him calculate and then, unusually, stop calculating. All right, he said. Yes, where? My sister lives in Westport, 20 minutes. I'll call her now. Does she ask questions? Constantly, but she'll stop if I ask her to. Claire's sister, Janet, arrived in 38 minutes, driving a blue minivan and wearing the expression of someone who had been told not to ask questions and was finding this physically painful. She took Lily with the promise of pancakes and the natural authority of a woman who had 3 children of her own, and treated all children, including other people's, as temporary members of her household. Lily went willingly, pausing only at the front door to look back at Marcus with her serious dark eyes. Will you still be here when I come back? She asked. The question was so direct and so simple that it seemed to rearrange the air in the hallway. Marcus crouched down to her level, a movement that clearly cost him something physically, given the events of the last several days, and looked at her steadily. Yes, he said. I'll be here." Lily nodded, apparently satisfied, and took Janet's hand and walked to the minivan. Claire closed the front door and stood with her back to it for a moment. When she turned around, Marcus was still near the bottom of the stairs, watching the closed door with an expression she had never seen on him before and couldn't fully read. "She believed you," Claire said. "I know." "You'd better mean it." He turned to look at her, and something in his face had shifted again. The same slow movement she'd seen in the study, only further along now, like a door that had been stuck for years and was finally, incrementally, beginning to open. "I mean it," he said. But the phone in his hand buzzed again, and the look on his face when he read the new message told Claire that whatever came next was not going to be simple. The second message was 3 words: "Check the files." Marcus stood in the hallway holding the phone, and Claire watched his expression move through something she couldn't entirely track, not fear, because she was becoming increasingly convinced that Marcus Harlow processed fear the way other people processed inconvenience, by converting it immediately into action, but something adjacent to it. Recognition, maybe. The particular look of a man who has been waiting for a specific piece of information and has just received confirmation that it exists. "What files?" Claire asked. "The ones I was sorting through this morning." He was already moving toward the stairs. "Come with me." The study looked different in full daylight. The curtains were still drawn. They had kept them that way, a precaution Marcus had insisted on without explaining until now, and the desk lamp threw a warm circle of light across the surface, where the files were stacked in the particular order Claire had watched him create at 6 in the morning. She saw now that it wasn't random sorting. He had organized them by date. Marcus went directly to a file near the bottom of the 3rd stack. He opened it, scanned the top page, and then turned it around and placed it on the desk so Claire could see. It was a financial transfer record, dated 14 months ago. The originating account belonged to Harlow Capital, one of Marcus's 3 companies, the private equity arm, the one she knew least about. The receiving account had a name she didn't recognize: Aldrin Consulting LLC. "What is Aldrin Consulting?" she asked. "It doesn't exist." Marcus pulled out the next page. "It was created 11 months ago in Delaware. Registered agent is a law firm that processes hundreds of shell companies a year. There's no website, no employees, no clients on record." He set the page down. "But in the 14 months since it was created, approximately $4.3 million from Harlow Capital has moved through it." Claire looked at the figures. She was not a financial analyst. Her competence ran to household budgets and staff scheduling and the logistics of running a large property. But she could read a number, and $4.3 million was a number that required no specialist interpretation. "Someone inside your company has been taking money," she said. "Someone inside my company has been taking money," he confirmed, "and doing it in a way that was specifically designed to look, on a casual review, like legitimate consulting fees. How did you find it?" "I didn't." He looked at her. "My accountant did 3 weeks ago. He flagged it to me privately and then—" Marcus stopped. "He had a car accident 2 weeks ago. He's in the hospital. He's going to recover, but—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Claire sat down in the wooden chair near the door. The architecture of the last 4 days was rearranging itself around her in real time. Not just the shock of finding Marcus alive, not just the anonymous messages, but the whole shape of it. The Tuesday cardiac event that wasn't cardiac, the timing, the accountant's accident, the files Marcus had been protecting by sorting through them himself in the early hours of the morning before anyone else was in the house. "The person who did this to you," she said slowly, "isn't someone outside the company. No. It's someone who knew your accountant had flagged the transfers, someone who knew he had come to you." "Yes." "Which means it's someone close enough to know your private communications." Marcus nodded. He was watching her follow the logic, and there was something in his expression, not quite surprise, but a kind of attentiveness she wasn't used to receiving from him, as she arrived at the same place he had been standing for 3 weeks. "How many people have access to your private communications?" she asked, "at the level required to know about the accountant's flag?" He paused. 4. My personal attorney, Richard Voss. My CFO, Daniel Marsh. My head of security, Patrick Greer. Another pause. And Donna. The name landed in the room like something dropped. Claire held very still. Donna. I don't believe it's Donna. His voice was firm on this. I want to be clear about that. 11 years, I don't believe it. But I can't remove her from the list on the basis of belief alone. No, Claire agreed quietly. You can't. She thought about Donna arriving this morning with red eyes and straight posture. Donna, who had spent 4 days in controlled devastation. Donna, who had taken the list Claire made and folded it into her pocket without comment. Donna, who knew this house as well as Claire did, and had known Marcus Harlow significantly longer. She did not believe it was Donna either, but she understood why Marcus needed to account for the possibility. What do the messages mean? Claire asked. If the person already knows you're alive, what are they waiting for? They're not waiting, Marcus said. They're negotiating. He picked up the secondary phone and showed her the full message thread. There had been more than 2 messages. She saw now that the thread went back 18 hours, a series of brief, precise exchanges that she read quickly. The anonymous sender knew Marcus was alive. They knew about the files. They were in the language of someone who had thought this through carefully, offering a transaction. The files disappeared. Marcus confirmed publicly that his revival was a medical miracle, and the transfer records were legitimate consulting fees, and everyone moved forward cleanly. In exchange for what, they hadn't yet said explicitly, but the implication was clear enough. Marcus's silence for theirs. You're not going to do that, Claire said. It wasn't a question. No. Then what are you going to do? Marcus looked at the files on his desk. Then he looked at Claire, and for the first time since she had opened this door 6 hours ago, she saw something in his face that wasn't calculation or control, or the particular guardedness she had catalogued over 4 years. What she saw was something simpler and more exposed than any of that. I've been trying to do this alone, he said. For 3 weeks and then for 4 days of being officially dead, I've been trying to manage this by myself because that is... He stopped. That is what I do. It's what I've always done. And it almost worked. And it also almost got me killed and resulted in my staff and possibly my daughter. He stopped again, restarted. I don't have a daughter. I meant the people in my household. I know what you meant, Claire said. He looked at her. The study was quiet. Outside the drawn curtains, the grey pewter morning was beginning, slowly, to let in light. The clouds shifting somewhere beyond the fabric, the room brightening by degrees. I need to call the police, he said. Not quietly, not through channels I control, formally. With the files as evidence, and a full account of what happened Tuesday. He paused. Once I do that, the leverage disappears. The anonymous sender has nothing to negotiate with if the files are already in official hands. And you'll be exposed, Claire said. The faked death, the cover story. Yes, that will be complicated. Yes, legally and publicly complicated. Yes, a beat. I know. She looked at him. He looked back. And in the space between them, 4 years of careful professional distance did something it had never done before. It became visible. Not as something to maintain, but as something that had always been slightly artificial. A structure built around a different truth that neither of them had looked at directly. All right, Claire said. Then we do it properly. I'll call Gregory. You call your attorney. The one you trust, not the one on the list. Donna handles the communications side. She was already thinking in schedules again, in sequences, in the particular architecture of a complicated situation that needed to be moved through carefully. And then we call the police. Claire. She looked up from her hands. Why are you helping me? He asked. You could walk out of here right now. Take Lily, go back to your sisters, and let this be someone else's problem. You have no obligation. Don't, she said. And then, because she had already used that word once this morning, and he hadn't pushed past it then, she added, You said I was the only person you were certain you could trust. I'm choosing to be worth that. He was quiet for a long moment. Thank you, he said, and this time she didn't stop him. The next 4 hours were controlled chaos of the most productive kind. Gregory Poole arrived and proved, once the initial shock had passed, to be considerably more composed than his earlier breakdown had suggested. Donna, when Marcus told her the full truth, was silent for 90 seconds and then began making calls with the efficiency of someone who had decided that the most useful thing she could do with her feelings was convert them into action. Richard Voss, Marcus's personal attorney, arrived at 1:30 and spent 20 minutes reviewing the transfer records before confirming, in the dry, definitive tone of a man who had seen most things, that the evidence was sufficient and the path forward was clear. The police arrived at 2:15. 2 detectives, not uniformed officers. Marcus had been specific about this, and Richard had made the call in a way that ensured discretion without sacrificing legitimacy. They sat at the formal dining table with the uncovered chairs, and Marcus gave a full account, and the files were photographed and documented, and Claire sat in the chair to Marcus's left because she was a witness to the morning's events, and also because, at some point in the last 7 hours, sitting at his left had simply become where she was. The anonymous messages were traced, not immediately, but within 24 hours, as Marcus had predicted they would be once the phone was in official hands. The sender was Daniel Marsh, the CFO, which surprised no one who had been paying attention to the list, and simultaneously stunned everyone who had worked with him, because Daniel Marsh was 55 and well compensated, and had given no visible indication for 11 years that he was the kind of man who would do this. People rarely did. That was, Claire reflected, the thing about the anglerfish's light. You didn't see the trap until you were already moving toward it. Daniel was arrested quietly at his home in Darien on a Thursday evening. The charges were substantial. The case, Richard told Marcus, was straightforward. The story that reached the press was managed carefully, not dishonestly, but with the particular precision of people who understand that truth can be presented in more than one sequence. The focus was on the financial crime, the corporate fraud, the near-successful attempt on a CEO's life. The specific mechanics of the false death report were acknowledged briefly as a necessary measure taken under advice during an active threat investigation. It was not a perfect story, but it was a true one, and it held. Lily came home on Friday afternoon. Janet's minivan pulled into the driveway at 4 o'clock, and Lily emerged wearing a paper crown that one of Janet's children had made for her, and carrying a drawing she had done at Janet's kitchen table, a house with a large sun above it and 3 figures of varying height standing in front of it. She had labeled them in her careful, slightly uneven 6-year-old handwriting, Mama Lily Marcus. The spelling was imperfect, the intention was not. She walked into the house and found Marcus in the front hall, which was where he had been standing for the last 15 minutes, and she held up the drawing. "I made this," she said. "It's us." Marcus took the drawing from her with both hands and looked at it for a long moment. Claire stood in the hallway behind Lily and watched his face and did not say anything. "You spelled my name wrong," he said finally. Lily looked at the drawing. "KUS is close," she said with considerable dignity. "It is," he agreed. "It's very close." He looked up from the drawing and found Claire's eyes across the hallway, and the thing she had been unable to name since 6:52 that morning, the thing that had been moving slowly in his face like light coming through drawn curtains, was fully visible now. It wasn't complicated, actually. It was one of the simpler things. She had simply never expected to see it there. She had not expected a lot of things about this day. 3 months passed the way good months sometimes do, quickly when you were inside them, slowly when you looked back. The legal proceedings against Daniel Marsh moved through the system with the steady, unglamorous momentum of white-collar criminal cases that have strong evidence and competent attorneys on the right side. Richard Voss had been correct. The case was straightforward. The shell company, the transfers, the accountant's accident, the compound used on Marcus, each piece connected to the next, with the kind of clarity that made prosecutors quietly grateful and defense attorneys visibly tired. Daniel hired good lawyers. They were not good enough. By November, he had accepted a plea agreement that would keep him in a federal correctional facility in Massachusetts for the next 7 years, and the story dropped out of the financial press with the quiet finality of a door closing on a room nobody particularly wanted to revisit. Marcus's accountant, a careful and decent man named Howard Briggs, recovered from the accident with a broken collarbone, a fractured wrist, and the particular psychological resilience of someone who has realized, from a hospital bed, that he was right about something important and that being right had mattered. Marcus visited him twice during his recovery. Claire knew this because Marcus mentioned it, which was the kind of thing Marcus had begun doing. Mentioning things, offering small pieces of information about his day and his movements and his thoughts, in the way that people do when they have decided, quietly and without announcement, to let someone in. The household had changed, not dramatically. The staff was the same, the routines were largely the same, the estate on Millbrook Lane continued to require the same caliber of management it always had, but something in the atmosphere of the place had shifted, the way a room shifts when the windows have been opened after a long time closed. There was more sound in it. Claire searched for the right word and settled on presence. The house felt inhabited in a way it hadn't before, even when Marcus had been living in it. He was different. She noticed it in the specific ways that come from watching someone closely over time. The small calibrations that don't make it into any single observation, but accumulate into something undeniable. He ate breakfast in the kitchen now, almost every morning, at the table where Lily ate her cereal and read her books. He had learned, without being told, that Lily required approximately 12 minutes of quiet in the morning before she was ready for conversation, and he respected this with a consistency that Claire found unexpectedly moving. He had also learned, she didn't know when exactly, that Lily's deep-sea fish book had been replaced by a new obsession, Birds of North America, a large illustrated volume that Janet had given her for no reason other than that Janet bought books for children the way other people bought impulse items at checkout lines. One morning in October, Claire had come into the kitchen to find Marcus and Lily sitting side by side at the table, with the bird book open between them. Marcus reading the entry on the peregrine falcon in the particular tone he used for things he found genuinely interesting. Not performed enthusiasm, but the real kind, the kind that didn't require an audience, while Lily listened with her chin in her hands and her cereal going slowly soggy. Claire had stood in the doorway for a moment before either of them noticed her. She had felt something then that she recognized, after a moment, as happiness. Not the cautious, provisional kind she had practiced for years, the happiness of someone who knows things can be taken away and therefore holds them at a slight distance, but something less guarded than that, something that took up more space. She had gone to the counter and made coffee without saying anything, and if she was smiling with her back to the room, there was no one positioned to notice. In November, on a Saturday morning when the trees on Millbrook Lane had gone fully gold, and the sky was the clear, sharp blue that only arrives in New England after the first real cold, Marcus knocked on the door of Claire's sitting room, the small room off the staff quarters that she had made into something resembling her own space over 4 years, and asked if he could come in. She said yes. He came in and sat in the chair across from her small couch, and looked for a moment like a man who had prepared something and was now reconsidering the preparation. "I want to talk to you about something," he said. "All right," she said. "I've been thinking about the house." He paused. "And about the arrangement. The current arrangement." Claire set down the book she had been reading. She kept her face neutral, which required more effort than she would have admitted. "What about it?" she asked. "It isn't working," he said. The neutral expression required additional effort. "What isn't working?" He stopped, started again. In 3 months, she had watched Marcus Harlow become incrementally better at sentences that required him to say something true about himself, and she had also watched how much it still cost him each time to do it. "The distance," he said finally. "The professional distance. It stopped being accurate some time ago, and I think we're both aware of that, and I think continuing to perform it is," he looked at her, "exhausting, actually. And I don't see the point of things that are exhausting and inaccurate at the same time." Claire looked at him for a long moment. Outside the window, a single yellow leaf detached from the oak tree near the staff quarters and fell past the glass in a slow, unhurried spiral. "What are you suggesting?" she asked. "I'm suggesting that I would like to have dinner with you," he said. "Not as your employer. As—" He paused. "I'd like to have dinner with you, Claire, if you're willing." She had thought about this. She was a woman who thought about things in advance, who prepared, who anticipated, who had been known to draft contingency plans for situations that had a less than 30% chance of occurring. She had thought about this particular conversation in the quiet hours of several recent nights, had turned it over, examined it from multiple angles, considered the complications and the history and the professional asymmetry, and the fact that she had a 6-year-old daughter who had already drawn them into a family portrait and labeled it with imperfect spelling and complete confidence. She had thought about all of it. "Yes," she said. "I'm willing." Something moved across his face, quick and unguarded, the expression of a man who had prepared for a more complicated answer. "That was straightforward," he said. "I'm a straightforward person. I know." And the way he said it, not as an observation, but as something closer to gratitude, told her that he did know, and that it mattered to him more than she had realized. They had dinner on a Tuesday, which felt to Claire like the right kind of reclamation for a Tuesday. A restaurant in Greenwich that was good without being theatrical, the kind of place where the lighting was warm and the tables were far enough apart for real conversation. They talked for 3 hours, not about the case, not about the house, not about Lily, though Lily was present in the conversation the way she was present in most things, woven through without dominating. They talked about the things people talk about when they are finally talking, where they came from, what they had wanted when they were younger, what had changed and what hadn't, the way a person's life looks from inside versus how it must appear from outside. Marcus had grown up in Western Pennsylvania, the son of a man who had built a small manufacturing business from nothing, and a mother who had taught middle school English for 30 years and believed, without apology, that reading was the closest thing to a superpower that civilians had access to. He had not inherited his father's business. It had been sold when his father retired. But he had inherited the understanding of what it meant to build something, the particular respect for the work underneath the result. Claire had grown up in Maine, the older of 2 daughters, in a family that was loving and financially precarious in equal measure, which had given her both her warmth and her efficiency. She had come to Greenwich at 28 for a job that was supposed to be temporary and had become, in the way of things that fit, permanent. She had made a life here. It was a good life. It had been, for a long time, a solitary one, but that was a condition, not a definition, and she had been careful never to confuse the two. She told him about Lily's father briefly and without drama. A man who had not been prepared to be a father, and had been honest about this early enough that it was painful, but not a betrayal, and who sent a birthday card each year with the specific consistency of someone performing the minimum and knowing it. She had made peace with this, the way she had made peace with other things. Not by resolving it, but by deciding it did not determine anything about what came next. Marcus listened. He was, she discovered, a better listener than she had given him credit for, which was saying something, because she had given him considerable credit. He listened the way people listen when they are not waiting for their turn to speak, when they are actually receiving what is being said. Walking back to where they had parked, in the particular coldness of a Connecticut November night that makes the air feel clean and definitive, Marcus reached over and took her hand. Not tentatively, not as a question, the way people do things when they have decided. She let him, more than let him. She held on. They did not rush. That was the thing she valued most, looking back, about how it began, the absence of urgency. The willingness to let things be what they were at each stage without pushing toward the next one. Marcus had spent years building walls so well that they became invisible. Claire had spent years being reliable for other people in ways that left little room for her own needs. They were, in their particular ways, both learning to do something they had gotten out of practice with. It helped that Lily was entirely unsurprised. When Marcus began staying for dinner more regularly, and then for the evenings after dinner, and when the professional arrangement between them evolved, gradually and with considerable paperwork that Richard Voss handled with the expression of a man who had seen everything and could therefore be surprised by nothing, into something different. Lily observed all of it, with the calm satisfaction of someone who had predicted the outcome and was simply watching the world catch up to what she already knew. "I told you," she said to Claire one evening in December, in the exact same tone she had used on the morning of the funeral that wasn't. "You did," Claire agreed. "I'm good at knowing things." "You are exceptionally good at knowing things." Lily considered this compliment, found it accurate, and returned to the bird book, where she was currently on owls. The formal arrangement that emerged in the new year was, by conventional standards, unconventional. Claire remained involved in the management of the Harlow household, not as domestic staff but as a partner in the practical and increasingly joyful business of making it a home. Marcus had space, for the first time in years, to experience what it felt like to live in a house rather than operate one. And Lily, who had walked into a man's study on the morning of his funeral and put her small hand over his and told him she was glad he wasn't in a box, had acquired, in the gradual and unforced way of things that are real, someone who read her bird books with her in the morning and who was learning, with considerable effort and genuine willingness, how to pronounce the names of migratory species correctly. On a morning in late January, Marcus came into the kitchen to find the bird book open to a new page. Lily was already at the table. The cereal was already poured. "Ruby-throated hummingbird," Lily said, pointing at the illustration without looking up. "Did you know they can fly backwards?" Marcus sat down. Claire put coffee in front of him. He looked at the illustration, then at Lily, then across the table at Claire, and the expression on his face was the same one she had first seen in the study in November, fully visible now, no longer moving slowly through him like light through curtains, but simply present, simply there, the way it had probably been building for longer than either of them had acknowledged. "I didn't know that," he said. "Now you do," Lily said. Outside the kitchen window, the January morning was white and still, and full of the particular silence that comes before snow. Inside, the coffee was warm, and the bird book was open, and all three of them were exactly where they were supposed to be. That was enough. More than enough. It was, in fact, everything.